Thank you for joining us for our new content series for Feel Good Friday. I am very excited and more than a little bit honoured to be joined by a renowned sleep expert, Dr. Catherine Liederle. She's our first guest, and the topics that we have planned for today are certainly close to my heart. So Dr. Cat, who I'm, like I say, I'm really excited to be joined by, is the founder and head of sleep health at Somnia. She is a sleep scientist and she focuses on the study of biological rhythms and is one of the leading experts in the field of sleep therapy. Dr. Cat, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here and be the first guest.
Please tell me a little bit more about what you do and what drew you to this specialism.
Two very good questions. So what I do in a nutshell is I help women, or particular women, to sleep well so that they can feel good. And feel good means feel good the next day. But it's more than that. It's about feeling good within themselves and in their lives, enjoying their lives, enjoying doing what they want to do. And for me, sleep is the foundation for that. And so while I focus, yes, on sleep and circadian rhythms, so the inner body clock, it's much more what this work enables the person to do. And the way I do that is by providing, yes, sleep therapy, maybe 3 one-hour sessions where we really, first of all, focus on what's going on. And this is really important for me. And I guess that's the scientist in me, getting an understanding of what is the unique situation of the woman in front of me, and then working with her, of finding ways, how can we respond more helpfully to what's going on? How can we respond more helpfully to what's impacting sleep and the not sleeping itself? So yeah, that's really my day-to-day work.
That's absolutely fascinating. And you specifically said women. Why? Is there a difference? Why would you be focusing on women as opposed to men and women?
So good question. So there is a difference in sleep between men and women. There's a difference in our biologies. And we see that women proportionally experiencing poor sleep more often than men. And it's similarly, for example, with depression and also anxiety. And now depression and anxiety and insomnia, poor sleep, they sort of hang out around the same street corner. They often sort of show and can impact on one another. So that is one reason. Then another reason clearly is because I'm a woman. But also women are often the primary caregiver. A lot lands on their shoulders, and sort of this idea of self-care, which is a very big umbrella term, I think, and nurturing, looking after myself, well, that sort of often comes last. Everyone else needs to be looked after first. And again, that then can have an impact on sleep. And as I said in the beginning, sleep is the foundation, but when that isn't right, everything else will wobble as well. So that is why I focus on women. It doesn't mean that I don't work with men. There's a lot of men I work with, but sort of my chosen focus is on working with women.
You've said that sleep's the foundation. Why is it that even 1 or 2 nights of disrupted sleep can throw us so much? I've recently got a faulty alarm at home, and I am absolutely floored by how much of an impact just 2 nights of disrupted sleep's had on me.
Yeah, so there will be differences between people. So some of the listeners may think, oh, I can easily go, with a poor night or 2 poor nights. There is a difference in how soon we feel a lack of sleep. But whether it's like what you experience, after a night of poor sleep, you feel it, or after 3 nights, the point is that lack of sleep, or poor quality sleep, as it sometimes comes, affects us. It affects us on the physical level. Our physical health and strength can be impacted. And we see here that even after 1 or 2 nights of lack of sleep, markers for example, diabetes, they go up. Doesn't mean you then develop diabetes, but the sort of the markers, the early markers, they go up. So you see that impact there. But also on our cognitive performance, so our ability to just think clearly, understand a situation, what the situation demands of us, and then related to that, problem solving and decision making. All of that is impaired by lack of sleep. So we can't really understand a situation. We can't take in all this information. And right now, where so much is changing in our working lives, but also in our home lives, old solutions don't work. They don't do the job anymore. If I'm not able to understand all this new incoming information, I will respond in my old rigid ways, and that won't solve the problem, right? So I kind of get into a vicious circle there. And then the final point here, sort of why sleep matters and how a lack of sleep impacts us, is on our emotional well-being, our mood. Right? The first thing we all notice is sort of being grumpy, irritable, kind of fly off the handle at the slightest remark of a partner or the barista, or someone on the bus, or a colleague. So that changes there. We become more withdrawn, but at the same time also more ready for conflict. Sort of we feel attacked much more quickly. And clearly, if I feel attacked, I respond aggressively, right? And that's where then conflict can arise. And that can have real implications in a work setting, working in teams, but also working in a client-facing role, customer relations. All of that can be impacted upon as well here.
You've talked about those 3 different aspects: physical, cognitive, and emotional, and obviously they overlap hugely. And I'd really like to ask, coming back to women, is there something in our physiology? Are we also being impacted by hormonal changes sort of throughout the month or throughout our lifetimes, which would then impact sleep?
Yeah, absolutely. So our hormonal cycle, the menstrual cycle, that has an impact, not in every woman. Again, we are all different, but many women talk about changes in their sleep before their period or the first few days. So that there is definitely a change and that impact of the hormones. Then pregnancy in itself, we can also see changes within the sleep behavior across pregnancy when the baby is born. And that's not just due to the baby being there as a source of disruption. There's also hormonal change and finding your feet in this new role of being a mother. There's a lot of, what's the word, sort of pressure, I think, on mums, particularly young mums, to be in a certain way, to be constantly elated and over the moon that their child has been born, and sure they are. But just, the normal thing of lack of sleep can impact your mood in a more negative way, and that is entirely normal. I think that there's a lot of pressure that certainly I see when I work with mums, that comes up. And then again, also the hormonal changes as we're going through the menopausal transition as part of the perimenopause, that really, plays havoc with our sleep. The hormonal changes, but also again the changes in maybe the role that we take on in those years. That's all impacting there on sleep and on our life.
Yeah, that was my experience. I've always had, what I can say is good sleep, good quality sleep, and perimenopause threw that all out of the water. I didn't know what was happening. And at that point, even trying to get information that wasn't signposting me to, depression or anxiety clinics, etc., to actually say, oh no, this is linked to the hormonal changes, that was earth-shattering for me.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then that experience, sort of, maybe there's a stigma sometimes can come up, and sort of this label that I have been given or someone is giving me of, you're a depressed person. I think there's still a stigma attached, and that can sort of almost like bring us down even more. And maybe understanding that all of this is completely normal, unpleasant, completely normal part of our female biology, and probably cultural norms on top of that. At least understanding that, and I find then opens up a path of, okay, so where can I make change here? And what can't I change, right? What is just part of being a woman? How can I change my mindset, my attitude? If I can shift that to a more accepting, not resignation, but to a more accepting attitude, it can bring a relief, quite literally.
Thank you. And you, the way that you've even just framed that, the way you phrased it just is so reassuring. We've talked about good sleep as a foundation, quality sleep. What is that? 8 hours, a lovely little eye mask, silk pajamas. What is good sleep?
Yeah. If you like that, if you want your eye mask, if you want your silk pajamas, whatever makes you feel comfortable. So when it comes to bedroom, just on the side note, bedroom environment, I always say to my clients, however you want to create that space, make it comfortable for you. I would be mindful of electronic devices and kind of not make it sort of too busy. But again, it's down to what you feel comfortable in, what you look forward to coming into that room and spending there the next 8 hours or so, 9 hours. Not all of it will be spent sleeping, but it's about you looking forward to that sanctuary, right? That's really the key. So personally, I hate the color red. As you can see, it's very blue behind me. And so if I was sleeping in a red bedroom, I would wake up every morning. I probably would go into that room of thinking, oh God, there's a red color. Right. Whereas if you give me a blue room or a green room, I'm happy to go into that space. That helps me relax. So that as a side note, but coming back, what is good sleep? Good sleep looks different for each single one. We do say, or the recommendation for a healthy adult is about 7 to 9 hours of sleep. But that is already a 2-hour window, right? So kind of it's about finding out how much sleep do I need. Some people may need a bit less than 7, some may need a bit more than 9. I would ask a few more questions when I see a client who tells me, 6 hours or 6.5 hours, that's enough, I can get by on that. I will ask more questions because getting by is not the same as feeling optimally. But in theory, it is absolutely possible. So it's about finding out how much sleep do I need? And that can also vary a little bit from day to day or from season. Depending on the light and the darkness, there can be slight changes. So it's not about getting too hooked, or I need 8 hours every night, and if I don't get my 8 hours, the world's going to come to an end. We don't do that with the amount of food we eat. There is probably an amount that's right for us, but sometimes we'll eat a bit more, sometimes we'll eat a bit less for no apparent reason, and that's perfectly okay. So there is flexibility, but yeah, as I said, somewhere between 7 and 9 hours.
But do you think that when you've said that you challenge, your clients to say, are you getting by or is it optimal? Do you fear that we've forgotten what good looks like? That between school, university, work, family commitments, we've got into a cycle that we actually don't know what optimal is anymore?
Yeah, it's absolutely possible. And we know that the lack of sleep impacts on our brain, right? Our performance, our ability to judge. And that includes judging our own level of sleepiness. And there have been studies to show that, to back that up, that subjectively asking a person, how sleepy are you? In the beginning, they will say, yeah, I'm sleepy, I'm sleepy, I'm sleepy. But then they'll say, oh, I'm just fine. Whereas if you run objective tests in parallel to asking the person, the subjective tests will show that sleepiness increases. With lack of sleep, sleepiness continues to increase. But our ability to notice that and to judge that is impaired. So we kind of get used to that lack of sleep. But that is because the brain is impaired. The sort of decision maker, the judgment, that's impaired, and that is the problem. So when people who, you know, say, oh, I can get by on 6 hours or 6.5 hours, when they then sleep 7.5 hours, they're like, wow. First of all, they feel tired. That's true. But then if they continue to sleep for 7.5 hours, they notice, oh, actually, the world is so much more colorful. So they then notice that change.
And when we say the 7 to 9 hours, is that in one go? Obviously, in sort of the Northern Hemisphere, we don't really have a culture of a siesta, of an afternoon nap. What are your thoughts on an afternoon nap?
It really depends. So first of all, there are nappers and non-nappers. Personally, I'm a non-napper. I can lie down, but I don't fall asleep unless I'm ill. My father, on the other hand, all his life has napped for 20 minutes, half an hour, all his life. That's what he does. And then he really feels that boost in energy, you know, in alertness. It's great for him. And overall, that's absolutely fine to have a nap. However, if you are someone who has poor nighttime sleep, so who maybe suffers from insomnia or another sleep disorder, having a nap then can often work as a substitute for that poor sleep at night. And that's when I would say, you know, let go of that nap. Let's work on looking at your nighttime sleep and get that in good shape, rather than using something here as a substitute. So if you're a good sleeper at night and you have your half an hour nap in the afternoon, early afternoon, absolutely fine. But if you have problems with nighttime sleep, then let's look to work on that first.
Yeah, address the big elephant in the room, the root cause first. And that leads me to another question about sleep. I know a couple of people that do get by on 4 or 5 hours during the week, and then they try to recapture that sleep deficit at the weekend. And that feels very counterintuitive to me. What are your thoughts of that extra long lie-in at the weekend?
Yeah, not helpful, not in the long term. It comes at a cost. So it plays havoc in a way with your inner timing system. So constantly changing your sleep times. And even if that by constant is, you know, 4 or 5 nights, one schedule, the short schedule, and then 2 or 3 nights, long schedule. In a way, it is as if you're flying, you know, to New York and back all the time. That has an impact on your inner body clock. And when that inner body clock gets out of sync with your environmental day, so that's the day around you, the light dark cycle, when that gets out of sync, the clock promotes the wrong internal activity, wrong activity for the time of day it is around you. So when we are awake, certain processes need to happen. And then when we rest and sleep, other processes happen. Right? But what happens with this constantly changing sleep times is that the processes for the day may then happen at night, and those which typically happen at night happen in the daytime. And over not much time, actually, this can lead to physiological metabolic problems and then diseases. And again, we see a whole range of diseases: diabetes, obesity, probably cancer. You know, then we have the performance impairment, and probably also mental illnesses and conditions that sort of are certainly triggered or can be triggered by that as well. So there's a big problem, basically.
That's quite sobering. That really, really is, because I wonder how many people are caught into that sort of you know, feast famine cycle of sleep. In the last 5 to 8 years, we have more and more access to sort of wearable devices that are helping to track so many things that we do, including sleep. What are your feelings on these tools and these trackers? Are they helpful? Are they giving us too information? Are they another source of anxiety?
All of that. All of what you've just said. So there's no sort of one clear-cut answer, but it is a bit of a sore point for me. in itself, I think, tracking your health, certain parameters of your health, including sleep, is not a bad thing. However, if we become obsessed with the tracking and we take that information as the absolute truth, then that can lead to problems. One reason is sleep trackers at the moment, they aren't accurate enough. There is still space for development and improvement, and that will happen. They will get better, no doubt. But right now, they're just not accurate enough. And so if I put all my trust into this one source of information, if that's not accurate, and it tells me, for example, I'm not sleeping well, I might then develop anxiety around this, and then really I don't sleep very well. But I'm also disregarding a lot of information that comes from within me. And for me, the most important point is to help my clients help, first of all, understand the information from within, notice that, read that, so to speak, and use that in their decision-making process. And then by all means, also look at your tracker data, but kind of balance those two sources of information rather than just focusing on this one external piece.
Thank you, Dr. Kat. So I think one thing that you have said is that we're all different. We all have different needs when it comes to sleep and what works for us. But are there any golden rules that you think should be unbroken when it comes to sleep hygiene, when it comes to our commitments to our sleep?
Yeah, so I talk about habits. I would call them golden habits rather than rules. It's a term I very much avoid because that can bring its whole sort of problems with that. But having habits to support your sleep. And for me, the most important one is around having regular sleep times. A regular time you go to bed, turn off the light, and then a regular time you wake up, you get up. That doesn't need to be every night on the exact hour. Could be sort of maybe half an hour sort of window, but keeping that as regular as you can. At the same time, there will be nights where you may go to bed much, much later because you're out, theatre, you may be on a plane crossing different time zones, or your child is ill, right? And sort of it goes out of the window. That's all okay if for the most nights, I have my regular sleep times and stick to them. And then the other part for me is exposing yourself to light, to daylight, ideally in the morning, but if not, then later on in the day, but spending time outdoors, and that's more than 5 minutes, even on a rainy, overcast day, for two reasons. One is to let your body clock, which sits up in your brain and it's connected sort of in a way to the outside world via your eyes, to let that body clock know daytime has started. But also being out means moving, and moving in itself is good for our health, can boost our alertness, our mood, and so does the light. The light also boosts our alertness and our mood, and all of that can then have a positive impact on your nighttime sleep. And the final point, because I think we always talk about, 3 most important points, is doing something that you enjoy doing. Right? That's something that's for yourself. And that could be just a 5-minute activity. That could be a 2-hour activity. I don't care. But something that you enjoy. That's my sort of third habit, I would say, for good sleep.
I love your golden habit. I'm gonna ditch the word rules. I absolutely love that. And if it's not too personal, Dr. Kat, what are your sleep time or morning rituals? What are your golden habits? Where's the park that, which park do you go to? What do you do?
Yeah, so I start my day with meditation and then a cup of tea with my husband. So very much sort of slowing it down, because once I open up the laptop, the speed, you know, increases massively. So that is really this way of just slowly starting the day, slowly reconnecting, and then going for a walk. And that sometimes is just literally sort of down the street and back again, depending on time. But for me, that's a really important part of how I start my day. And then in the evening, I do again slow things down and dim the light, dim the noise, very general noise, just dimming that down. So that my body and my brain have a chance to kind of get the message, okay, sleep is coming, but also to prepare for that, to slow down. And my sleep times, it varies a little bit between summer and winter, I feel, but it's somewhere around sort of 10:15, 10:30, so I'm more of an early bird, and then waking up 6:30, 7 o'clock, somewhere around that time. But I don't use an alarm clock. I just allow my body to wake when it's ready.
Oh, I absolutely love that. I think you and I have a very similar cycle. I actually use a sunrise alarm clock. Nice. And I don't particularly need it during spring and summer, but autumn, winter, it comes into its own. You mentioned the laptop. And I've got to ask that question. With so many of us in this last 18, 20 months working from home, especially those people who wouldn't, you know, traditionally or historically have worked from home, what do you feel about devices, checking emails on our phones before going to bed, opening our laptops as we put our pot of coffee on? Thoughts?
Yeah, if sometimes we have to. Right, if you work in a, you know, globally connected sort of workplace, there may be a requirement that you check your email later in the evening, and then that's just how it is. But as a general habit, I'd say find a cut-off time when you stop that noise in a way, and similarly in the morning. Waiting, because a friend once said that, you know, as soon as you open your phone or your emails in the morning, you kind of hand over the power to sort of dictate your day over to someone else, right? Because when we see that email, whether it's a pleasant or unpleasant one, it absorbs it, it takes us away from that coffee pot that we've just put on, and then, you know, a little disaster can happen there. It takes us away from the conversation with our children, our family, right? Because our attention goes over there, and we miss out on stuff, which, you know, then afterwards we don't feel good about. So I would find sort of cut-off times that work for you, not as strict rules, because as I said, sometimes, you know, demands of the world is I need to check, but having these times in the evening and also in the morning to kind of just slow everything down.
Thank you, Dr. Kat. I could absolutely speak to you for hours. See, it's already having that impact. I'm going to ask a couple of personal questions that may make it into the recordings. They may not. Are we the only animals that sleep the way that we sleep?
Well, we're the only animals that can willingly shorten their sleep. That's every, you know, a dog, a cat, an elephant, when they're tired, they go and sleep. They go to their resting place and sleep. We can very much override that. We've got electric lighting, and we have our TV and other sources. You know, we can, in that sense, push back our bedtime quite willingly. So that is unique to, you know, us humans. Absolutely.
To our detriment. And I wonder, you know, I suppose that maybe some of the data doesn't exist to how we would have slept, you know, pre the Industrial Revolution, pre electric lighting. But has there been research in communities where, you know, maybe those interventions came later as to how they sleep differently?
Yeah, there have been, with sort of, yeah, communities in Africa and South America. There have been some studies, and it's a little sort of tricky, but sleep probably would somewhat be different. There's this idea that we woke up in the middle of the night and then were awake for an hour or two. Personally, I'm not too sure of whether that really was a biological sort of waking up, or whether there is something more cultural going on, because it's not necessarily substantiated in the data that we find. Also with the sort of sleep duration, would we have slept longer or shorter? Again, I don't find it sort of a clear-cut picture, because we all differ, and some people naturally need less sleep than others. So we also have difference in sleep timings, and all of that makes sense if we think about how we evolved in groups of people, where when you sleep, you sleep not in a well-protected house. It would be, I don't know, out on the savannah, on a tree, or in a cave, but certainly you know, the lion could quite easily come and get you. So if you sleep in a group where people fall asleep at slightly different times, you know, and need different sleep durations, the likelihood that there's always someone awake to check and be on guard is actually quite helpful. We also know that we all wake up throughout the night a number of times, not just one time and then we spend, you know, hours awake. We actually all wake up every 90 to 120 minutes, and it's a short awakening. It's almost like you check the environment, is it safe, you roll around, you fall asleep again. So that's probably all built in to make sure that we are safe. But as I said, whether we had this long awakening in the middle of the night, whether that was, we know from historic records, yes, it was there, but whether it was a biological drive behind it, not too sure about that.
I can definitely see why you focused on this specialism. There is just, it is not just fascinating, but there's so many different aspects, like what you've just talked about from a sort of social and anthropological perspective, as well as the science behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there probably will never be a clear-cut answer. And sometimes I wonder, do we need to? Because you know, the individual, it's about how do you sleep? How much sleep do you need? What are your sleep times in the environment, in the situation that you find yourself in, right? It's about finding out what's right for you. And then in the ideal world, you can structure your waking day accordingly. And I just mentioned that we have different sleep times. For an early bird, you know, like me, the world's fine, you know, being at my desk for 8, 9 o'clock, no problem. But someone who goes to bed after midnight, maybe even at 2 a.m. and still needs 7.5 hours, let's say, for them to be at their desk, ready, you know, being with a smile on their face by 9 o'clock is really, really hard. It's almost impossible. And they will carry a sleep debt with them, and that has an impact on their performance, on their general well-being, on their physical well-being. And I think that's where a change needs to happen around flexi times, that people, you know, are allowed to sleep when it's right for them, and then work when it's right for them. And given that we are working, you know, globally, it makes perfect sense to have people come in as and when, you know, their chronotype sort of tells them to.
I think that's a fantastic note to end on, because I do think that one of the silver linings of the last 18 months has been that for those of us who are able to work remotely, who have had job security, they have been able to respond to their personal rhythms without the commute.
Yeah, exactly. And this is really interesting. It's with the pandemic, we saw a lot of people, yes, who had poor sleep, or, you know, it got quite bad. But then there are also other people where sleep improved because they didn't have to get up early anymore. So there's a lot that changed from a sleep perspective, not all bad. Really interesting.
Dr. Kat, thank you so much. Thank you for being our first guest on our new series, but thank you for just being such a font of wisdom and resource.